सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
The union budget is always presented on the 1st of February. That is that one big financial event in the year we all look forward to, or at least people who track the economy, economics, political economy look forward to. Although I myself on previous episodes of Macro Sutra and Economics have said it is just an accounting exercise. Why do we make such a big song and dance about it? But it is a big event. And we have to talk about it. But why are we talking about the Union Budget 2023, which is presented on the 1st of February in the last week of October? We still have 3 months to go. The thing is, the budget making exercise began on the 10th of October. That is almost 3 weeks back. The process has started and people have begun not only talking about the budget, but also what the budget should do or should not do. And we have a very good lesson to learn from what has happened in the UK over the last week or so, when they tried to fix their economy, cut taxes, and then ran into a crisis which was so bad that the Prime Minister had to first sack her finance minister and then quit herself. So there are very important lessons for us to take, and that is what we will be talking about in Macro Sutra today. Welcome to the show. I am YP Rajesh, Managing Editor at ThePrint, and I have Radhika Pandey from NIPFP with me. UK is a reminder of what can happen when things go wrong. But 10th of October, the budget making process started. So what do they do for say 3.5 months? How does it go on? What happens exactly for people who don't know what happens in the North Block or wherever else they sit and do this exercise?
So on the 10th of October, the exercise starts, means they start meeting people, they start meeting the stakeholders, industry representatives, also taking their views on what should the budget contain. So what we have seen is that a large number of industry bodies like Confederation of Indian Industries, FICCI, they prepare documents on providing suggestions to governments on what should be the economic policy agenda for the budget, what are the sectors they should focus on. So there are a lot of brainstorming sessions that begin from October 10. That is one part of the task, and the other is that the ministry officials, the Ministry of Finance officials start meeting the various ministry officials to decide on how much they have spent. So whatever was budgeted, say for Ministry of Labour, have they spent that much or not? Is there some revised estimate, and what will be the estimate, the budgeted expenditure for the next year? So what we call in budget language BE and RE. BE is the budget estimate and RE is the revised estimate. So in this coming budget, which is for financial year 2023-24, we will get the revised estimates for the current year, whether any ministry, all the ministries, whether they have spent their budgeted amount, whether they have overspent, whether they have underspent. Depending on that, the budget paper will contain a revised estimate for each ministry, and also an estimate for what they are going to spend in the next financial year. So these are the two elements of conversations that begin from October 10. One is having brainstorming discussions with various stakeholders, researchers, economists, professors, industry bodies, and so on, and also with the various ministries and state governments on what should be the revised estimate and budget estimate for the next year.
Because I was just thinking, although the budget is presented on the 1st of February, it comes into effect only from the 1st of April. So even there is a gap of 2 months. So when they start the exercise in October, only 6 months of the financial year has passed. So is that enough information available to start on the next budget process?
Yes. So revised estimates, which is a very good point, because revised estimate also is subject to change because then we have in the next year we have something called actual. So for every estimate we have a budget estimate, revised estimate, and also then the actual. So that also changes because our financial year is from 1st of April to 31st of March. So the budget announcements start to get implemented from April 1.
Yeah. We just mentioned UK, and when we were discussing today's topic also, we were talking about how UK is a lesson for us. Why is it a lesson for us? I mean, as in what went wrong in the UK before we get into the Indian situation?
Yeah.
What went wrong in the UK?
So the UK finance minister announced something called a mini budget, where the main elements of the mini budget was a series of tax cuts. So from March or April of next year, they were scheduled to raise some taxes. So those announcements were deferred. It was announced that now taxes won't be raised, and the top tax rate, which is 45%, which is on the super rich, that was abolished. So this was an attempt to pump prime the economy, or to, the message was that by doing this we are going to promote growth because UK is passing through a state of recession. At the same time it has high inflation levels. So the main thrust of the announcements were a series of tax cuts. The problem was that there was no strategy on how these because these tax cuts would lead to expenditure reduction, how those expenditures would be financed, because now the government will have lower expenditure, how it will do. So the only thing that came around was that the government would have to borrow more. So when borrow more, that means that the bond market were rattled, they were not interested in lending more. It gave a kind of a message that government borrowing is going to explode like anything at a time when inflation is rising. Also, because tax cuts would be reduced, it would complicate the task of monetary policy, because the Bank of England has been increasing interest rates just like mostly all central banks have been raising rates. And on the one hand, if fiscal policy starts to, which is through the budget, they start to cut rates, that will give a boost to consumption and may further complicate the inflationary situation. So at a time like this, when the situation is uncertain, highly volatile, what is needed is that the monetary policy and the fiscal policy need to move in tandem. They cannot be at cross purposes, and that was the problem with the announcements made during that time, and that created a host of snowballing impact. There was the pound depreciated, the markets crashed, the bond prices, the government bonds, or the UK government bond prices crashed. In other words, the yields rose. So there was a lot of problem, and there was kind of economic crisis, chaos all over. So that was what happened.
The UK situation. And there is something special about next year's budget in India which did not apply to the UK. The budget next year is also the last full-fledged budget before the 2024 Lok Sabha elections. And we know what generally happens, or what is the general temptation, as the word Radhika uses in her column, for governments before elections. They want to woo voters with something or the other. Radhika, you in your piece, you have gone into a series of issues on what the government should not do in the budget and what the government should do or can do. Let's talk about what the government should not do in the budget.
Yes. So as you mentioned that, this is going to be the last full-fledged budget before general election, when there will be an interim budget. So there could be a temptation to announce populist measures, but the problem this time, especially 2023, is going to be a very challenging year. It will be more challenging than 2022, because we have seen a series of rate setting agencies, international agencies cutting growth forecasts for the world, for India. Even Economic Survey is reportedly estimating growth between 6 to 7%. So there is going to be growth slowdown, and till now inflation is elevated. There are global headwinds. So in this time when the situation is very uncertain and very complicated, budget making exercise and budgetary decisions are also difficult. There are a lot of trade-offs between what to do and what not to do, which is always the case, but this time around it will be more difficult because 2023 is going to be a period of slowdown, not only in India, but domestic slowdown as well as impact from global headwind. So during this time, what is needed is to focus on fiscal discipline, fiscal prudence. Why that is important is because if you remember COVID year 2020-21, our fiscal deficit surged to 9.2%. Then it came down gradually to 6.7%. For this year, we have pegged at 6.4%. So it is still quite high. And now is the time to take stock of the finances and to see that we have to keep a track of finances so that at the time when there are emerging situation, it can be spent flexibly. If the government locks a lot of finances or the substantial expenditure is made on high ticket scheme, it hampers the ability of the government to respond flexibly to emerging crisis, which we do not know what kind of crisis can occur. So that is the reason that this is the time to focus on fiscal prudence, which we could not focus over the last 2 years, but now is the time to get back to focusing on fiscal consolidation as well as debt reduction, because our debt to GDP ratio is quite high. It is around, during COVID time, general government debt stock rose to 89%. Even now it's 85 to 86%, and we need to reduce, otherwise it will create problems for the future generations. So those are the things that the government should focus on, fiscal consolidation, and not going in towards various substantial expenditure enhancing expenditure.
Radhika, in your piece, you talk about the glide path for fiscal consolidation, and that it's something connected to the FRBM Act, which is the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. So how does this glide path work? So we have 1 year target, which is 6.4% of GDP, fiscal deficit target for this financial year. And for 2025-26, we have a medium-term fiscal deficit target, which is 4.5% of GDP. Now, what is lacking is there is no glide path. There is no path from moving from 6.4 to 4.5, because still there is we need to reduce our deficit by almost 2%. 200 basis points.
Yes, 200 basis points over a span of 3 years. So the markets need to know what is the government's plan, what is the calibrated fiscal policy strategy towards achieving the 4.5% fiscal deficit to GDP ratio by FY26. Now, we used to have, that is our practice, if the FRBM, the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, requires the central government to come up with, to announce the medium-term rolling targets. So they used to be part of the budget papers till 2018-19, but then they were suspended due to uncertainty. But this is the time to again get back to announcing the glide path, so that it's more clear, the fiscal policy strategy is articulated better if we have a glide path that also gives the signal that the government is serious about that 4.5% number and not just talking about 6.4%. Because medium-term fiscal policy reduction is important. We don't have to limit ourselves to just 6.4% fiscal deficit. We have to reduce it further to 4.5%. So what is the path? That is what is meant by the glide path.
Your prescription is quite simple, although you make it sound simple. I don't know if it is simple in implementation. You say focus on macro stability. What, according to you, is macro stability in this current situation, in the global headwinds, in the slow growth, in the post-pandemic recovery situation? What is macro stability, and how can it be? Is it easy to achieve?
So there is this trade-off between boosting growth in the immediate term or focusing on macro stability. Now, in the immediate term, the focus should be on macro stability because the situation is uncertain. So we need to have our fiscal finances anchored in a way that we are able to respond to the emerging situation. So in the current scenario, macro stability means, from the fiscal point of view, it means focusing on fiscal consolidation. This does not mean that the government should not spend at all. What it means is that there should be targeted support, like government has been spending on food grain scheme, government is spending on employment, the Manrega scheme. So all those targeted schemes need to be there. They need to be part of the overall policy strategy. But the temptation to announce big ticket schemes where a large substantial part of the government revenue is locked, which hampers the ability to respond to flexible situation, that should be avoided. So that is one element of macro stability, which is for fiscal policy. And for monetary policy, it should focus on inflation control, inflation normalization, which it is doing. Now, if both of them do follow this, then they are moving together. They are not at cross purposes with each other. Otherwise, if fiscal policies start boosting, putting a lot of money into people's hand, there will be a sudden increase in surge in demand, and that will again complicate the task of monetary policy. So they need to move in tandem, particularly during this time. And when the dust settles, then the focus should be back on boosting growth.
Let's take questions, Radhika. And the first one is from our loyal questioning viewer, Aditya. Hi, Aditya. Hope you're well. You had a good Deepavali. Can we expect any harsh decisions this time around which government might take in order to support its fiscal position? And there is a second part of the question. And will the government continue to focus on its infrastructure-based budget? And how can the government encourage through budget to increase private investments in these? He's actually asked 3 questions. So do you expect harsh decisions?
I don't think there will be harsh decision, because whatever statements are being issued by a finance minister or by official, what they are saying is that they are going to focus on growth. So if they're going to focus on growth, there won't be any harsh decision. But at the same time, what is important is that they should have some outlook for how they are going to move towards fiscal consolidation, not in the current year, but over the medium term. What is the plan to move towards deficit and debt reduction? So that is on the harsh decision part. On the
infrastructure side, in fact, the next question is also connected to infrastructure, so I will combine it so you can give one infrastructure answer. Vishal Sharma asks, government has been spending a lot of money on infrastructure projects such as road, inland waterways, ports, railways through budget, as well as off-budget expenditure for NHAI, bonds, etc. Does this help? If yes, how? If this is not spent, then will this hold back a rating improvement of India? So Aditya is asking, will there be a continuation in the focus on infrastructure? And Vishal Sharma is asking, does this work? Does this help infrastructure focus?
Yeah, so I think the plank will continue to focus on infrastructure investment, because even now private investment though it has picked up in some quarters, we don't see a very sustained revival of private investment. So there would be policy focus on capital expenditure. On whether it works or not, there are what needs to be done is to think there needs to be a mechanism for monitoring of projects. Once a capital investment or infrastructure investment project is announced, is there some cost overruns? There should be some real-time monitoring of projects, and wherever there is a problem, those need to be addressed. Once that is done, then the multiplier effect of infrastructure investment will get further strengthened, because there's definitely, when we have a road project or some highway project, it gives impetus to employment. It has forward and backward linkages, because it will boost the demand for steel, cement and other sectors which are directly linked to infrastructure. So yes, it helps, but then the second part also, the monitoring part also needs to be given serious attention to have a better advantage from infra.
Deepmalya Gantet asks, another question about sectors, although it's not about infrastructure. Which sector do you think the central government should be focusing on? For example, agriculture needs a complete revamp.
So there would be, yes, focus on agriculture, and agriculture has been a focus area. If we look at the pillars of budget over the last 2-3 years, agriculture has been a focus. The other area will be MSMEs, micro, small and medium enterprises, and also the rural sector, because as we've discussed last time also that wages in rural sector are still subdued. So what needs to be done to improve the wages such that at least from negative real wages, they move towards the positive territory. So agriculture, MSMEs, rural sector, infrastructure, these would be the focus areas.
Yash Nagar is touching specifically on two projects. One, actually, he's talking about the current government having introduced PM Kisan. That was 2019. During COVID, it also introduced free ration for millions of Indians. Will following fiscal prudence and fiscal discipline lead to these schemes being shut down?
No, fiscal prudence does not mean shutting down of these schemes, because it's very hard to shut these schemes, and whatever fiscal prudence or whatever guidance we get from what is an efficient budget making process, what it means is that the targeted support must continue, and at the same time keeping a lid on finances. So it is a very delicate balance between continuing with the targeted support so that the inequality or the K-shaped recovery that we talk about, that can be addressed. So these schemes which have helped a lot, especially the free food grain scheme distribution has been very helpful during these difficult times, and that is why we've seen government extending this by another 3 months. So, and it has had an impact on the food subsidy burden. Food subsidy has overshot by more than 1 lakh crore due to this. Fertilizer subsidy has overshot by 1 lakh crore. So these schemes would continue, but what is important is at the same time balancing with fiscal prudence and continuing with targeted support.
Ayush Chaudhary says, in the backdrop of the talk about a possible global recession, is it not the time for the government to increase government spending to push growth? And don't you think not having a populist scheme in budget is a mirage?
So government spending will be there. Government spending is there. That is why we have a fiscal deficit. What is equally important to assess where the government expenditure is more productive, where the government expenditure is leading to growth, is leading to employment generation. So that is why the government's focus till now has been on capital expenditure, because that leads to multiplier impact on job creation and growth. So government expenditure definitely will get a boost, but what is important is the prioritization of expenditure towards more productive purposes, given that there are various competing demands for the limited revenue. So expenditure will be there, but it needs to be allocated to more productive purposes.
Kishore is questioning numbers, as in the government's numbers. He says, why is the government not showing accurate debt figures as reported in some newspapers, that some numbers or figures are being hidden, for instance, off-budget borrowings? What is the reason behind this strategy?
So this used to be the practice till 2019-20, where a big chunk of government spending used to be off budget, where what it means is that government used to borrow not directly but borrow through its public sector entities. For example, Food Corporation of India is borrowing, or Power Finance Corporation is borrowing, ONGC is borrowing. So that used to be called off-budget borrowings because that was not reflected in the calculation of fiscal deficit. So after that, there were a lot of reports by CAG, the Comptroller Auditor General of India, on compliance to FRBM, and they raised this issue that the off-budget liabilities should also be brought on budget. So whatever, the budget process should become more transparent. We should be stating the correct extent of deficit and debt. So we have seen that reform happening over the last 2-3 years. Now we have seen over the last 2 years, in fact, that now the government has moved from off budget to on budget. A lot of the debt which was owed to these public sector entities has been repaid. So that reform has happened. So this was a problem a couple of years back, but now this is not a major problem because it is being addressed, it is being reflected in the budget.
In fact, you can call it a fiscal cleanup, and I think that is one of the reasons why the deficit number also shot up.
Yes. We have a statement called EBR, Extra Budgetary Resources, as a part of the budget paper that reports these transactions.
The last question is from Hindol Bhattacharya. It's not directly related to the budget, so if you want to take it, you can take it, Radhika. Hindol asks, it seems that the harshest US Fed action is reserved until the midterm elections on 8th of November. That's 10 days from now. Do you agree? How bad can things get in terms of the dollar strengthening and the rupee sliding? What can India do?
So dollar strengthening will continue so long as the US Fed continues with its interest hike practice, interest hike trajectory. But what we also know is that at some point, the Fed will go slow on interest rate hikes because for the last 3-4 meetings, we have seen a 75 basis points hike. And we are also getting indications, there are some evidences that now this interest rate hike has started pinching on the household, which was the intent of the Federal Reserve policy statements. So going forward, I think in 2023, maybe March or April 2023, beyond that, there will be some pause, there will be some reassessment of the interest rate hikes and its impact on inflation, and then deciding on whether the Fed needs to go with further interest rate hikes or not. So I think that will stop at some point. There will be some pause towards the mid of 2023, and that is also reflected if you look at the IMF's projections of inflation. IMF has projected that inflation will decline in next year. So that means that the central banks will go slow on their aggressive interest rate hikes, which means that the dollar strengthening, which is strengthening due to the aggressive rate hikes, that strengthening will also slow down, and that will have a salutary impact on the rupee. So that is what will happen. And on the what should be done, we know that Reserve Bank of India has been intervening to manage the rupee slide, and that is reflected in forex reserves now falling to $532 billion. But at some point, we also know that Reserve Bank of India will also allow rupee to slide and not aggressively intervene. So we will see these kind of policy changes happening over the next couple of months.
And just a couple of weeks back, we were talking about 79, 95 and 80, and today it's 82 point something, 83, it crossed 83. So that's how, currencies move. That's how economies move with global events. There is OPEC meeting coming up. Actually, OPEC cuts slightly from the 1st of November. Ukraine and Russia are going in a direction we hope it doesn't escalate there. So a lot of events that are happening that keep influencing economies and economic decisions, and we will continue to keep track of them, and we will continue to bring you our best insights and analysis thanks to Radhika. Please do keep watching Macro Sutra. We will be back next week with another new episode. Thank you for watching this one. Stay safe and have a great weekend.